Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our presentation. The revolution was already here, the surprising future of ebook acquisitions. I'm Jesse Holden, Program Manager for Shared Content at the Orbis Cascade Alliance, a consortium of academic libraries in the Pacific Northwest. I'm based just outside of Portland, Oregon.
Hello, everyone. My name is Christine Baker. I'm the Director of Consortia Sales and Publisher Relations for Gobi, and I'm pleased to be here today.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Scott Wassinger. I'm Vice President for EBSCO eBooks.
So a little background before we get started here, talking about print books and print book acquisitions in libraries. As many of you probably know, the print book model has been well established over generations here in libraries. The economics and logistics of publishing, purchasing, collecting print books is well understood by libraries, vendors, publishers, consortia. Library collection development and infrastructure over many, many years has centered on collecting print monographs. And alongside that, we've noticed over the last 20 or 30 years that journal publishing has really made the transition to electronic publishing and pricing much easier than print books. That said, ebooks are becoming more and more mainstream. And in terms of ebook acquisitions, hasn't been necessarily a good alternative to block purchasing, collections, large groups, bundles of titles. We know that large bundles of low-cost titles are often aggregated either by publishers or by third-party vendors to provide breadth and save library staff work, but it also limits the flexibility and adaptability for collection development to operate at a selection level. We know that library collections must support myriad curricular and research needs, and tying up a lot of funds in these big bundles limits the ability to meet those needs. In other words, purchasing these large collections or bundles, blocks of ebooks, is an all or nothing proposition. That said, our traditional print book monograph acquisition process has been disrupted significantly. We've faced flat or reduced library budgets, particularly following the Great Recession in 2008, and made even more dire coming out of the pandemic. We know that for decades, hyperinflation of electronic journals and other electronic resource products has eroded traditional book budgets, even as book prices have continued to rise. With the rise of ebooks, with the increased costs for e-journals, there has definitely been a reduction in print book demand, and we're still seeing those implications play out following the pandemic. In addition to that, there's reduced print runs of monographs, and library collections and library users are more reliant on print on demand to support print demand. Ebooks, as I mentioned, have some problems of their own. Unlike journals, they've been slower to develop in terms of technology and uptake. The long form writing, particularly in the humanities, is less conducive to reading on a screen than, say, journal articles. Ebooks have faced a number of compatibility issues with devices and different platforms that the ebooks are released on, often coming hand in hand with heavy-handed DRM, preventing sharing, sometimes preventing access. And when access is available, the models can be cumbersome. Sometimes they're counterintuitive. Sometimes there's too many steps. And that is in addition to a high cost per volume. Ebooks, particularly in library collections, as most of us know, are incredibly expensive. So looking towards discounting, most discounts are really only available for ebooks in static publisher or subject collections. And while demand rose sharply during the pandemic, there hasn't been a good way to meet those granular content needs for monographs. So that brings us to the fundamental question, which is how do we sustain academic ebook publishing and library monograph acquisitions in this evolving ecosystem?
Gobi and the Orbis Cascade Alliance have had a long-standing working partnership. We began our relationship back in 2007 as we were selected as the preferred print vendor at that time. And then several years later, we began working with Orbis Cascade on how we could best serve the consortium on an ebook program. And over the course of time, we've experimented with different options, lots of discussion, lots of meetings, testing different offerings that have been presented over the years, from demand-driven acquisition models to e-collections to evidence-based acquisitions. And we realized that all of those programs did provide a lot of opportunity for the Alliance. A lot of learning was taking place, but we were looking for something different. And based on our long history of communication, we began talking about how we could move forward with a new model. So in those discussions with the Alliance, there were a few things that they requested of Gobi, with certain things in mind. They were looking for an out-of-the-box solution, something different than what we've tried and tested in the past, looking for ebook discounting, similar to what we do with print book discounting, excuse me. Looking for an approach that was a little more granular on selection and decision-making for what titles actually were purchased, and potentially looking at a way in which we could allow individual members that were part of the Alliance to pick and choose titles that were most appropriate for their institution's needs. And then finally, over time, Orbis Cascade has relied heavily on the consortia tools within Gobi, and those were continuing to be an important piece of the puzzle in whatever solution Gobi could present to the Alliance. So we spent time discussing internally on possible options that we could present, and we came up with a solution that involved EBSCO ebooks that we would offer to the Alliance members for a full fiscal year ending in June of 2023. The overarching program did have a consortia goal in mind, but there were no individual requirements, meaning the institution was not required to hit certain benchmarks. But as a group, there was benchmarks that were set both for the mid-year and the end of year of the program. The discounts were to be applied to all order sources, including those orders placed within the Gobi interface, as well as EBSCO Host Collection Manager. No titles were restricted from the program, and the discount applied to all different types of ordering types, including approval plan purchases, title by title firm orders, demand-driven acquisitions, and auto upgrades for ebooks.
So what happened? What were the results of this program? Well, jumping way down to the last part, ultimately, Orbis Cascade as a whole met the first benchmark at the 6-month point, but did not meet the full year benchmark. So does that mean this was a failure, a failed program? Not at all. A lot of positives that came out of this. First, The program generated a lot of awareness and purchasing of EBSCO ebooks. There was a dramatic increase in total spend or order volume for the year across all Alliance members. As a whole, the consortium saved more than $75,000, and the most any individual saved was more than $20,000. Substantial. What then do we do in the subsequent year? The full year benchmark wasn't reached, so do we just terminate? No, we gave it a lot of thought. We spent time on how we might move forward with this, and a lot of similarities to the first fiscal year ending of the program, ending June 30th, 2023. For the subsequent 12-month period, FY24, we also have two benchmarks, one at the 6-month point and one at the full year point. We, of course, adjusted the target amounts for each of those benchmarks, but otherwise the structure, as we're seeing it on the screen here, was similar to the first year. But we did make some adjustments to it. And here's how we adjusted it a bit. If the first benchmark is achieved, the current discount will continue for the second 6-month period. So the same full discount for the full year. However, and here are the changes. If benchmark 1 is not achieved, but there is growth, the discount will continue. A discount will continue, but the discount rate will be reduced. If benchmark 1 at the 6-month period is not achieved and there is no growth, the discount will be discontinued.
So through this experience, we can take away a lot of conclusions. Next slide, please. First of all, as you probably surmised from the beginning of the presentation and throughout the discussion, we've all concluded that we're past the ebook tipping point in library collections. Our collections are increasingly electronic, both in terms of journal and monograph content. Users more and more, particularly coming out of the pandemic, are expecting e-access. They expect to be able to access their books 24/7, wherever they're at, on whatever device they have at hand. We're also seeing more books published as ebooks. 10, 15 years ago, it was unlikely that a new publication would necessarily be available in ebook format, and now it tends to be a first choice. And so we can say really safely that ebooks are here to stay in library collections. Next slide, please. With all of that in mind, we really rely on our innovative partnership. As Chris pointed out and Scott emphasized, we have a long tradition of shared vision and trust between our organizations. Through our discussions in the year, maybe more than a year leading up to the launch of this model, we really talked about our willingness to experiment and take risks. We knew that to adapt to the changing conditions that we were seeing in publishing and user behavior, that we really needed a constructive dialogue to figure out what the best way forward would be. With that in mind, we knew that we had to have realistic expectations, both what could be done, but also what had to be done. And there was a said out loud understanding that not every new idea will work, but we can't go backwards. Many ideas came back to us from Gobi and EBSCO that weren't quite right. There was a lot of constructive back and forth trying to determine what it was that might work, that might be different, and that might help us move publishing, selling, and acquiring ebooks into the future. Next slide, please. So to summarize our key takeaways from this program, the program does some really incredible things in terms of ebook acquisitions. First of all, despite working as a consortium, it lets all of our individual member institutions purchase to meet their local collection development needs. There was a lot of freedom in the program to select and purchase according to whatever that particular institution needed for its users. Our consortium, Orbis Cascade Alliance, played a central role in coordinating the program with Gobi, EBSCO, and the members. But it let members be flexible with their participation without incurring any risks. Going into it, the most amazing thing is there's really no downside for the libraries. To the extent that they participated, they realized a discount, and to the extent that they worked together, or at least coordinated together, they could look forward to extending that discount. So going back to the title, here's the real revolution. We've come full circle, and this program emulates really what people have expected for all of those years of print book acquisitions, which is the ability to select titles and achieve a discount without having to buy large quantities of books, allowed them to be flexible and meet their own collections and curricular needs, and to do so in a way that doesn't involve a huge amount of financial risk for the libraries. So with that, last slide, please. Thanks to our colleagues at EBSCO and Gobi for being willing to try something new. To my consortial colleagues around Orbis Cascade who participated and continue to participate in the next phase of this program. And thanks to Elizabeth Duell in our Orbis Cascade virtual office who has provided support for this slide presentation.